الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير الأنبياء المرسلين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وخليل الله ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يجعل هذه محاضرة حجة لنا ولا حجة علينا يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Let's try to go again. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أحسنتم يا مشايخ. So as you all know, we're studying Tawheed, obviously, and we started studying, we learned what was Tawheed, Fadl Tawheed, wa ma yukaffir min al-dunub, believing in Tawheed and what it removes from sins, and we went through the different aspects and different phases of it. Today, we're actually going to have an unorthodox approach because we're going to study 4 different chapters, but we're going to jump around in the chapters for it to make sense. I want the point to make sense. Today, we're going to study basically making a vow and seeking help or refuge from other than Allah can be a form of shirk. And we already went over and discussed what the definition of shirk was. Today, which is very important, is for people to understand that the statements that they make with their tongues, all right, the statement that people make with their tongues can get them in trouble with who? With Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to start the class off with a hadith to make my point. The hadith says, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, إن الأب يتكلم بالكلمة من سخط الله ولا ينقلها بال يحوي بها في جهنم. Subhanallah. وأكس كذلك. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that indeed the servant, إن الأب يتكلم بالكلمة, that the servant can say something, okay, and by what he or she says can cause the anger of Allah. وَلَا يُقِلَهَا بَالٍ. But to the person thinks what they said is really not what? A big deal. But it's big to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because of that statement can be a reason why the person ends up in the fire. And likewise, the opposite is true. That the servant, the person may say something, and they get the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is pleased with what they have mentioned. But to the person, it's not a big deal. Maybe it's make a good word to somebody else. You don't know what you can say that can gain the pleasure of your Lord. And because of what they have mentioned, Allah will be pleased with them and grant them what? Jannah, paradise. The point here from this hadith is to be cautious and cognizant of what we what? Of what we say. Because really what we say can get us in trouble with Allah, which is the basis for the class today. And so I open up with that hadith, but what we're going to talk about here is by the end of class. I know this is very bright. I apologize. The projector is on a slant, so bear with me. All right. If somebody wants to be in charge of trying to move it, they can, but I don't want to get up and keep moving it. But can everyone see it? Please. Today you have at the end of class. I want everyone to at least be aware of 5 things. Important takeaways from today's lesson. By the end of class, you should be able to know what is a vow in Islam. What are the types and rulings of it? What happens if you break a vow? What happens if you break it? The second thing we're going to study is what is the ruling on continuing old practice from Jahiliyyah as a Muslim? What is the ruling of continuing old practice of Jahiliyyah as a Muslim? What is isti'adha and istighatha? And what is the difference between the two? We're also going to learn the dua of protection when visiting or staying at a new place. And this is important. And also we're going to cover explanations of important verses and what is their connection to the chapter. So everybody, generally speaking, should have the books with them. If you have your book, we're gonna start from chapter number 12. So today we're going to be studying from chapter 11 to chapter 14, but we're going to pick up from chapter 12, inshallah. What we're going to do is, what's the first thing we're going to study? Somebody from the front. Who's going to read the top in the red?
What is a vow in Islam?
Does anybody know what a vow is? It's not like getting married. You say your vows. No, I'm not talking about that. I know you got married, Akhi. Huh?
A promise.
A promise. Somebody says a promise?
I was going to say an alphabet's a vow. That's what you're speaking about?
Like alphabets, my vowels? A-E-I-O-U?
No, the vowel like the Kessida or the Doma.
No, not like that. Not like that. Another, huh?
A testimony?
A swear, a testimony, a covenant. It's stronger than a promise. It's strong because a promise like what, right? It's a promise. But another, in Arabic, it's like entering a contract with Allah. Now, we're going to talk about this. So a vow, and I want everybody to understand this. Because what is the connection between a vow and shirk? We're going to talk about it. A vow, can someone read this up front? Brother Rashid.
Saying something that makes an act of worship or an action, good deed, an obligation upon yourself only if you are given something in return from the law. This includes agreeing to refrain from doing an action only to receive something in return.
So basically, a person makes something an obligation upon themselves. Okay? But they make that an obligation upon themselves with hopes that they're going to receive something from Allah. Or they're going to refrain from something basically they enter a contract with Allah. I'm going to give an example. And probably some of us have said this before without knowing that it's a vow. So, what are we talking about? It's like, for an example, a person says, oh Allah, if you get me out of this problem, if you do this for me, I swear I'll give $1,000 in charity. Can anybody give me another example? I'm sure we have said vows here before. Oh Allah, I swear if you get me out of this, I'm never going to do this again, huh? What about something? Give me something else.
If my kids succeed in an exam, I'll slaughter a sheep.
You'll slaughter a sheep. 3 years, inshallah. All right. What else?
If he doesn't do that, I'll slaughter him.
Astaghfirullah. What else, huh? Someone says, if you give me a boy, then I will raise him, I will do this. Basically, say enter in a contract with Allah. Does everyone understand that? Now, this is not an obligation upon you. You made this an obligation upon what? Yourself. I remember one day I was on the internet, somebody said, oh Allah, if I marry so-and-so, I'll give you 1,000 shahadas. I said, actually, what are you talking about? All right. But basically, a person makes an obligation upon themselves. All right. Is everybody with me? Yeah. Okay. And so this is stronger than a promise because you're entering a contract with Allah. But there's a caution. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he cautioned people from making vows. We're not saying that it's not permissible, but he cautioned the ummah from making vows. I'm going to mention 4 reasons why you should stay away from making vows. Okay? The first one, I need a volunteer. Somebody volunteer before you volunteered. Mu'ad, it's too late. Can you go to chapter 9? And everybody on their phones, if you don't have a Quran, you can use Sheikh Google. All right? Chapter 9, verse 75 through 77. Chapter 9, verse 75 through 77. And we're talking about the caution against making what? Vows. And what is a vow? It's stronger than a promise.
A contract.
You're making a volunteer, you're making an obligation upon yourself to do something, right? But the Prophet ﷺ, he forbade the Sahaba, he cautioned them from making vows. And Maaf, do you have it?
Yeah.
Can you read it?
And there are some who have made a vow to Allah. If He gives us from His bounty, we will surely spend in charity and be of the righteous.
Stop. So what is the contract they put upon themselves? Oh Allah, if you give me what? From your bounty, give me money, give me sustenance. Then I will do what? I'll do this. Oh Allah, if you give me that job, I'll do this. Oh Allah, if you allow me to marry so-and-so, I'll do this. Oh Allah, if this happens, you see my point? But the person is what? Making an obligation upon himself. What happened, Ma'ad? Go ahead.
But when He gave them out of His bounty, they withheld it and turned away indifferent.
SubhanAllah. When Allah gave them what they wanted, what did they do? They turned away. They forgot about what happened. So what happened?
So He caused hypocrisy to plague their hearts until the day they will meet Him, for breaking their promise to Allah and for their lives.
SubhanAllah. So the Prophet said that one of the main reasons why he used to caution people from making vows is because you run the risk of being punished by Allah if you don't hold your part of the bargain. Is everybody with me? Play it. So this is one, again, we're not saying that it's not permissible, but be very cautious of putting yourself in this situation. Play it. Wait, sit down for kids. Another reason why the Prophet ﷺ used to caution from making vows is this is the reality. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, the reality is making a vow does not change anything that has already been decreed. Is everybody with me? Although it makes someone who is stingy give up something. What does that mean? لا يستخرج به من بخيل. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, you making this vow is not going to change the decree of Allah. What Allah was already going to decree was going to what? It's going to happen. But it makes someone who is stingy give up something. Why? Think about it. Person says, oh Allah, if you allow this thing to happen, I would give someone $1,000. Okay? If that thing did not happen, was that person going to give that money in charity anyway? No. So this is what the Prophet mentioned. Making a vow only makes a person who didn't want to do something to begin with, it makes them what? Give up something. So again, this is the second thing that why the Prophet ﷺ cautioned the Ummah from making vows and making these voluntary contracts is because you're putting yourself and running. If you don't hold your end of the bargain, you're putting yourself in caution, being punished by Allah, and the reality is not going to change anything. Number 3. This is extremely important and probably the most important. And can somebody read it? Hey, can you see it?
Corrupts the intention because the person is only performing the act of worship
Reluctantly. What does that mean?
Not sincere. They really don't want to do it.
So give me an example.
For example, donating $1,000. That they really don't want to donate that $1,000, but they stipulating almost, that Allah, if you give me from your bounty, that I will.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh Allah, if you let me get the, I'm gonna go on Umrah. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. It corrupts the intention because the person doesn't really want to do it. So the person is not doing this act of worship sincerely for Allah. They're doing it as if they're going to get like a fair trade. Get a bounty exchange. As if they're trying to force Allah to do something. Okay? This is one of the most important because it corrupts the intention. When we talk about worship, our worship should be sincerely trying to please the Creator of all, not trying to get something out of return. All right. One of the other reasons why, and we're going to head to the book, and it's going to make, I'm breaking it down like this for a reason. I want someone to, out of all of the reasons, number 4 is why you really need to understand this. It can cause a person to leave the religion of Allah. What do I mean?
They feel like they didn't get what they asked for, so, so they have doubts now. Or Allah, you didn't give me this, so I'm out.
It's basically, it's as if the person, some people believe by making this vow, as if it's going to be a guarantee that they're going to get what they're asking for. So if they don't get it, they feel like what?
I can't feel my part, you didn't come through yours.
I need people to understand this because a lot of times we say certain things without thinking. All right? Or some people may say, or as soon as they accept Islam, they start to go through certain issues and certain problems in their life. And they say, well, if Islam was the truth, I wouldn't be going through this right now. You went through problems before you even found out about Islam. It didn't mean anything. Does everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's important to we need to understand this because we don't want to voluntarily make these vows. And we're going to study what is that connection between this and shirk. Does anybody have any questions in regards to the understanding why the Prophet ﷺ cautioned the Ummah from making vows?
I have a question.
Yes.
So in the Quran, when Zakaria says, makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him a son.
Mm.
And then he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give me a sign or give me something.
Mm-hmm.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him the sign would be like you're not going to be able to talk to people. Is that kind of like...
It's not a vow, technically.
It's not.
Right?
It's a sign.
It's a sign. But I thought you was going to mention this point, which Allah praises. Yufuna bin nadar. He praises those who fulfill their vows. So somebody may say, wait a minute, Abdul Wahab. You just said the Prophet ﷺ cautioned the Ummah from what? From making vows. But now you're saying that what? Allah praises those who fulfill their vows. So, who wants to explain it?
Well, there's, I guess there's, I don't know, but I'm guessing there's smaller vows that you make maybe with people, and that you have to come through on those.
Okay, close. So we remember in the beginning we said we're going to study what is a vow in Islam and what are the types of vows. So here I want everyone to understand that there are two types of vows in Islam. You have conditional vows and you have non-conditional. A conditional vow is if a person says, if such and such happens, I will do what? I will do this. So somebody give me an example other than $1,000. Because don't say 999. Somebody give me an example to make sure that you truly understand. Huh? If you make the team, if you make the team, he'll pray extra sunnah before every salah. Yeah. One, he shouldn't make that vow because now like the prayer is conditional now. Now, if I don't make the team, Allah, I ain't praying to you now. All right, you can't make those type of vows. It shouldn't be conditional. This is what we're talking about. However, when Allah says yufuna bin nadar, that He praises those who fulfill their vows. This is talking about non-conditional vows. For an example, a person says, I vow to pray tahajjud, but nothing is attached to the vow. Right? In reality, the person is forcing themselves, they're basically getting themselves to strive better in worship without stipulating a condition. For an example, a person says, I'm going to read more Quran, inshallah. I'm gonna fast more. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna fast Monday and Thursdays. I'm gonna try to do give me another act of worship. I'm gonna make i'tikaf this year. I'm gonna finish the Quran every month. Right? These things are good. And if a person fulfills it, Allah is praising the person for fulfilling the vow that the promise they have made. Does everybody understand the difference between the two?
Yeah.
I need you guys to respond.
Yeah.
Somebody said no? Okay. So again, the conditional vow is a person says to Allah, if you make this happen, then only if this happen, I will pray more. Only if this happen, I will start to study. Only if this happen, I will make hajj. Only if this happen, I will fast extra. Right? Only if you allow me to get this job, then I will do this. All right, so again, that thing may not never happen. So are you going to leave off good deeds? No. However, a non-conditional person challenges themselves and they leave it like that. Oh, well, I'm going to pray more. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And so what is the connection between this and so what we're studying? All right, so we're going to actually go over that. When we talk about vows, though, I want you to open your books to chapter 12. When someone has it, can they read it? It should be the chapter of a form of shirk is making vows to other than Allah. Who has it? Habib, you have your book?
It says Allah the Most Exalted says, they are those who fulfill their vows and they fear a day whose evil will be widespreading. Allah the Most Exalted also says,
And whenever you spend for spending in sadaqah, charity, in the cause of Allah, on whatever vow you make, be sure Allah knows of it.
All right, and the hadith is what we're going to focus on. Can you read the hadith, Khalid?
Narrated Aisha anhu, Allah's Messenger said, whoever vows that he will be obedient to Allah, he should be obedient to him. And whoever made a vow that he will disobey Allah, he should not disobey him. Al-Bukhari.
All right. Also, I especially want the youth to understand this part. The Prophet said, he said, "Man nadhara yuti Allah fayuti." Whoever vows that they're going to obey Allah, then they need to do what? Obey Him. But whoever says they swear by Allah, and the reason why I want the youth to understand is because even growing up, for an example, in New York, I've heard other youth say it. They may say, "Wallahi, man, I'm going to do such and such and such and such." But that what they're talking about is haram. The Prophet, he said, whoever swears by Allah that they're going to do something that's haram, then what? They can't do it. Because I've heard people use the excuse, "Akhi, I said wallahi, so I got to do it." No, you can't do it, Akhi. You swore by Allah that you was going to do something that's unlawful, you can't do it. So I definitely want everyone to understand this. What the Prophet mentioned, "Min nadhara an ya'si Allah fala ya'si." Whoever swore by Allah or made a promise that they were going to disobey Allah, then do so. For an example, I remember when I was younger. I'm gonna tell a story, Habib.
Go ahead.
So I remember when I was younger. I was growing up in New York. I had a friend of mine. We were growing up, and he said, "Akhi, wallahi, when I get older, man, I'm gonna get like a whole bunch of tattoos, like on my face, on my neck, and everything like that." And so when we got older, around 18, he was like, "Yo, I'm gonna go get these tattoos." I said, "Akhi, you can't do that." At the time, we wasn't really practicing, but I was like, "Akhi, you can't do that." He said, "Man, look," I said, "Wallahi, man." I said, "Well, I got to do it." Right? And so in this case, should he do it? Because the Prophet mentioned what? Whoever swore that they were going to do what? Somebody says, again, to an argument with their brother. Could be their blood brother. How many people have siblings in here? By show of hands. How many people have been into fights with their siblings? You laughed. You must have lost.
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest. I have siblings too. I have older brothers. I have fought with my brothers. I won some and I won some. All right? But the point is that we have gotten to disputes. There's been times where you say, "Akhi, wallahi, man, I'm going to punch him in the face." Can you do that? The brothers looking at each other. Can you do that? Yes or no? No. The point is, if you swear by Allah that you're going to do something that's wrong, then what? You can't do it. Even though you swore by Allah. All right? Now, what if a person swears by Allah that they're going to do something halal? All right? We all have done stuff in the past. May Allah forgive us all. But I'm just using these as examples. All right? So even myself, I have said, well, Allah is going to do such and such, and it may have done it, or whatever the case may be. But the point is that if a person swears by Allah that they're going to do something, all right, and it's haram, they can't do it. But what if a person makes a vow to Allah, "Oh Allah, I'm going to do something," and it's good, but they don't fulfill what they said? Does everybody understand what I'm saying? So an example is, whether it's conditional or non-conditional. Brother Rashid, can you give me an example of a vow? Not $1,000.
It's like if you vow that you're going to read the Quran,
Uh-huh.
you're supposed to do it because it's an allowed act.
Right, so a person says, "Well, I swear by Allah, man, I'm going to get better. I'm going to read the Quran every month." All right? A person has made this what? An obligation upon himself. So if a person does not fulfill the vow, what is the condition? I want everyone to go to chapter 5, verse 89. For an example, and this is also important, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "La nadhara fi ma'siyati Allah wa kafaratuhu kafaratu yamin." Does anybody know what yamin is? Like, yeah, not right, yes, but when you swear, it's also like when you swear. It's like, for an example, wallahi. Person says, "Wallahi, man, I'm going to do such and such, such and such." Right? And so But what if a person does not fulfill something that they said? Well, what do they have to do to make up, to expiate for that oath? Does anybody know? Go to Kaaba? Said Toba. Huh? صح لكن غيرك صح huh? Peace of people. Fasting. People always say, you said, wallahi, you ain't gonna do it. You gotta fast how many days? 3 days. And that's the what people normally say. But there's certain things that come before that. Like, for an example, I remember when I'll tell another story very quickly. Have you leave me alone? I was in New York, it was on Eid. And I was like, man, I told this brother, I said, wallahi, I'm gonna do a backflip. I don't know why I said it. So wallahi, I'm gonna do it. And I didn't do it. He's like, hey, you gotta fast 3 days. It's the first thing, because you said wallahi, and you didn't do it. When people take these oaths, whether it's a vow or whether you're swearing by Allah, if you don't do it, to expiate for what you said, it's chapter 5, verse 89. It's actually, you can't go straight to 3 days. That's the last of the options. And I want you guys to understand this, because this is the reason why we're going, is because this is how people talk. This is what people say sometimes. All right. And so who has chapter 5, verse 89? Mustafa. Sheikh Mustafa.
لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الأيمان فكفارته إطعام عشرة مساكين من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم أو كسوتهم أو تحرير رقبة فمن لم يجد فصيام 3 أيام ذلك كفارة أيمانكم إذا حلفتم واحفظوا أيمانكم كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تشكرون.
طيب. English.
Allah will not take you to task for that which is unintentional in your oaths, but He will take you to task for the oaths which you swear in earnest. The expiation thereof is the feeding of 10 of the needy, with the average of that wherewith you feed your own folk.
Okay, stop here. So if a person if they swear by law, they enter a contract or making a promise or a covenant with Allah, if they can no longer hold up that thing, how do they expiate for it? The first part is what, Mateen? Feeding how many people? 10 people. This doesn't mean you go and you buy a Snicker bar and you start hitting 10 people. All right? You feed them from what you will feed your family. But not just anybody, poor people. It has to be poor people. You have to feed 10 poor people. All right? To expiate for that promise that you made, if you can no longer hold it up. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ, if he doesn't find 10 poor people, or if he can't feed them, he can also he has the option to do what? He can clothe them. Also, I want you to think about this, subhanAllah. By feeding and clothing these people, is Allah still going to reward you? Yes. SubhanAllah, even when you broke the promise that you made, Allah encourages you to do something good, and then He will still reward you based upon what? You have this, SubhanAllah, the mercy of Allah. And not to feed anybody, not to just clothe anybody. This can be Muslim, non-Muslim, Muslim Masakin, just 10 poor people to feed them. But it has to be from the food that you would normally feed your family. Or you can clothe 10 people. Or, which back in that time, really not in today's time because you don't have any, free a slave. All right? And then at that point, if none of those options are available, then and there you do what? Then you fast 3 days. It's not permissible for a person just to jump straight to the end and just fast 3 days. They have to exert themselves to what? To find poor people. And feed those poor people, or clothe those 10 poor people, right? And again, these are good things that a person will do that Allah's going to reward them for. But this is what, if a person, what happens if you break the vow that you had? Does everybody understand that?
I have a question.
To follow.
Or starting from the top, or is it end? So
in the ayah it says, "Oh, right, or, right," but the scholars of tafsir, they mentioned that this is bitartib. It's in order. So if you can't do this, because at the end it says, فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ, and if he doesn't find these particular things, فَصِيَامْ, then let him fast. So we'll kind of indicate that he has to go through this order to feed them, and if he doesn't have the capability or he doesn't find the people to feed, then he has to exert himself to clothe them. Yes.
So if he can feed them, then it stops.
That stops. So once you fulfill one, you don't have to do the other ones.
But it starts from the top.
It starts from the top to the bottom.
Fasting.
Nah. And this again, so this is if a person swears by Allah and they don't do it, right? Or they say wallahi that they're gonna do something, they don't do it. Yes. Samad.
Is the fast, does it have to be consecutive 3 days or?
So the ayah doesn't mention that it has to. No, it doesn't have to necessarily be consecutive, right? But it has to be 3 days. Wallahu a'lam. Wait. Yes. Uh-huh. Well, you can't free an inmate from prison. I mean, if you do so, you might go to jail too. But if you talking about like paying their bail or something, nah, it doesn't count for freeing a slave. No. That's a nice try though. That's a nice try, but it doesn't count. Posting somebody's bail is not necessary. I know how brothers may feel behind the wall. 13th Amendment, slave. I know, I understand, but it doesn't take the same ruling as someone who is true in slavery, especially back then. Again, these are good things that Allah challenges, but the answer is no. It doesn't count. But you have to go through this order. What we're going to do too is here we're going to talk about what is the ruling on continuing old practices from Jahiliyyah as a Muslim. What is Jahiliyyah? The days of ignorance. The days of ignorance. Before Islam, Muslims had various different customs. And so what was the ruling on continuing these old practices? The ruling is that it's not permissible to carry on certain old practice that you did prior to Islam that was not good and bring them over into the days of Islam. But for an example, some of the Sahaba, when they first accepted Islam, sometimes they will make mistakes when they would swear. Because they used to worship what? Idols. What are some of the gods they used to worship? Huh? Hubal? Uh-huh. Lat wa Uzza? He said Uzza? Uh-huh. Lat. Ba'al. Manat al-Thalitha, and so on and so forth. Some of the Sahaba, when they would swear, they will make a mistake. Right? And said, Min halafa bil Lat wa Uzza. Whoever swore by Lat and Uzza, فَيَقُلْ لَا إِلَهَ اللَّهِ, then let them correct it and say La ilaha illallah. Because it was a habit they used to what? Say. Just like for an example, you might have a Christian who was a Christian, he accepted Islam. Alright? And he's like, man, Jesus Christ. Alright? He made a mistake from what he said. Alright? But he just corrected La ilaha illallah, and that's the end of it. So if a person swears like that, some of the scholars mentioned فَلَا كِفَارَ عَلَيْهِ, that there's no expiation for it. Or there's no expiation for that. Only expiation for that is for them to correct what they said. What I want to do is we're going to go to chapter 13. A form of shirk is what? Who has it? Brothers. A form of shirk is what? What's the title of the chapter? Seeking refuge in other than Allah. And can you read the verse?
Really, Allah most exalted said, and really there were men amongst mankind who took shelter with the males amongst the jinn, but their jinn increased them, mankind in sin and transgression.
طيب أنهم كانوا رجالا من الإنس يعوذون برجال من الجن فزادوهم مرهقا. So during this time, what is the tafsir? What is the story behind this particular verse? Does anyone know? Ibrahim. Hamza. The story is a pretty interesting story. Before Islam, what the Sahaba, no, I won't say Sahaba, I didn't mean to say the Sahaba. What some of the people would do during that particular time, before Islam came, anytime they would visit a new area, especially in the desert, the valley, the people at that time, for whatever reason, they did believe in jinn. They did believe in the jinn as we know today as jinn. But when they would go to this valley, they would seek refuge. They would say, I seek refuge with the biggest jinn in this valley. I want this jinn to protect me. And so they would seek refuge with these shayateen. And the shayateen, because they would do that, they would increase them in fear, to make them fear them more, or in kufr and disbelief, and push them further and further away. So again, this is the story behind this particular verse, where Allah is narrating that one of the practices of Islam previously, or prior to Islam, Jahiliyyah, is that when the people would visit new areas during that particular time, or that valley, they would say, I seek refuge with the biggest jinn, the biggest shaitan of this particular valley, and they would seek refuge as it to be protected, and then they would do whatever that jinn said to be protected for that particular night, however long he was going to stay there. So Islam, obviously, Islam forbade that, and it destroyed that particular practice. So what do we have today? The Prophet ﷺ, and I want everyone, remember I said in the beginning that one of the 5 things we were going to learn is learn the dua of protection when visiting or staying at a new place. This includes, if you're traveling, you travel for business, or whatever the case is, you stay at a hotel, you're visiting family in a different city, or what have you. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever says this dua that we're about to learn, who can read this at the bottom? I heard Allah's Messenger ﷺ saying, when any of you, who else can finish it?
When any one of you stays at a place.
This includes whether it's a funduk, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a new place, whether you're visiting a new, wherever you're at, if you're traveling, wherever the case may be. The Prophet ﷺ said, when any of you stays at a place, he should say what? Salim?
I seek refuge in the perfect words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the evils of what he created. Nothing would then do him any harm until he moves from that place.
Subhanallah. Again, the Prophet has mentioned, whoever says this particular dua, whether they're staying at a new place, they're staying anywhere, لا يضره شيء حتى يرحل. Nothing will harm this particular person. Nothing will harm him until they will leave. I'll tell you a funny story very quickly. I remember I was in Medina, and we were staying. They have a place. Anybody who's ever been to Medina, made Umrah, they have a place called Bayda. All right, Bayda is like this area where it's white mountains. All right. Yeah, it's white mountains, and they have a whole bunch of camels out there. You go and drink camel's milk. It's very nice, and families go out there. And so my first time in Medina, I went out with some students, and I went out with the sheikh and things like that. We went out to the middle of the desert, drinking camel's milk and all that stuff. And I heard in the middle, it was pitch black dark, all right? And I'm the only brother here from America. So I hear like this, like coyotes or a wolf or something like that. So I said, it's time to go, Sheikh. It's time to go. So he says, Abdul Wahab, we going to spend the night out here. I said, you spend the night out here. I'm not spending the night out here. All right? I got a car. I'm going back to my dorm. So he says, do you not know the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, that if you say this dua, that nothing will harm you throughout the night? So I said, my faith ain't there yet, Sheikh, but I'm going to say the dua on the way back to the dorm room. But I'm not staying out here with you guys. But nevertheless, some of the students, they mentioned they stayed, because it was known in that area, they had like scorpions and stuff like that. I'm like, no, I'm not staying out here. But I went out there before, we stayed out there after I said the dua, alhamdulillah, I was fine. But this dua, I want you guys to memorize it for homework, especially because I know brothers travel, they go different places, and it's important that you say this. And how do you say this dua? Is a'udhu. I want everybody to repeat after me. A'udhu. Bi kalimatillah. At-tammat. Min sharri.
Sharri
ma
ma
khalaq.
khalaq.
And so I seek refuge in the perfect words of Allah from the evil of what He created. The reason why this is important, the scholars also use this dua as a proof to show that the Quran is not created by the Quran is the speech of Allah. How? Because here it says, A'udhu bi kalimatillah. I seek refuge with the words of Allah. And we know that the Quran is the what? The words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright? And so I seek refuge with the words of Allah, the perfect words of Allah from the evil He has created. Alright? And at the bottom, if you can read this, as Abu Hurairah reported that a person came to Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Allah's Messenger, I was stung by a scorpion during the night. Thereupon he said, had you recited the words in the evening? The dua we just learned, A'udhu bi kalimatillah tammat min sharri ma khalaq. Had you only recited these words, it would not have done any harm to you. All right? And so this is what a person should say. Okay, so here when we talk about isti'adha, going back to, we said that we were going to learn 5 minutes?
Actually 3. I said
3
3 minutes.
minutes.
We got some house stuff.
Huh?
We got some house stuff.
House stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So isti'adha, when a person seeks refuge, asking Allah, which most of the cases, we're asking Allah to prevent an evil or calamity before it occurs. Istighatha, and I want you to read it because I don't want to run out of time, but you're going to read chapter 14 tonight for homework. I gave you all the tools that you need to navigate yourself when you read the chapter. Istighatha is seeking help. This is asking Allah to remove the evil or calamity after it has taken place. Okay. The difference between the two, again, is isti'adha is you're asking Allah to prevent an evil or harm before what? Before it happens. Istighatha is that you're asking Allah to remove it after it has taken place. The last thing we'll mention, and we'll take questions here, is a ruling on istighatha, a ruling on seeking help, so it's not a form of shirk, is the person has to have the ability to remove the harm, and the person has to be alive. You cannot ask the dead for help. The dead is shirk. Dead can't help you. They can't harm you and they can't help you. And a person has to have the ability to actually assist you. If these two conditions are met, it's permissible to ask the person, and it's not a form of shirk. If these two conditions are not met, then it is a form of shirk. So for an example, you may have someone, they may start asking, oh, so-and-so has passed away from my family, they're righteous, and they memorize the Quran, and just, oh, help me on the day of resurrection, help me with Allah, this, that. No, that's a form of shirk. The person is not alive and they don't have the ability. But if a person is alive and has the ability to actually assist you, then it's not a form of shirk. Very quickly, if you go back to chapter 11. Since now we have kind of covered what a vow is and what are the types of vows and what have you. In chapter 11, there was a man by the name of Thabit bin Dahaq. He said to the Prophet, he said, Nadar Raja and Yanhar ibn the Bawana. There was a man, he said, that he was going to sacrifice a camel at a place called Bawana. This in Saudi Arabia now, it's kind of close to Yanbor. But this is what the man said that he vowed that he was going to do. And so the Prophet asked him a series of questions as to why did he make that particular vow. And when the man basically said, I didn't make the vow because of this or because of that, the Prophet then and there said, then fulfill your vow. Because there's no fulfilling of a vow in regards to disobeying Allah. I gave you the tools that you needed. I know we didn't read every word from the book, but what we did today is I took the concepts and I wanted to break it down for you. And so now that you have the tools, when you read chapters from 11 to 14, you're able to navigate yourself between these particular chapters. So for the sake of time, we'll stop here. We have a couple minutes before the Salah. So we'll stop here. If there's any questions about anything we have covered thus far.
Before we get too far into that, with the time moving, next week we're going to move the class time up. either 7 or 7:15. You can go ahead and make that decision.
So next week, inshallah ta'ala, we actually, we have that before we have time, we'll move the class back into 7 o'clock, inshallah. So we'll start the class at 7. Starting next week, inshallah. Starting next week. Jazakallah khair. Reminding me. All right, so again, the class next week is going to start at what time?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. All right. Also, is there anything else?
I was asking how long. You got a stories from your email. How long were you doing that 4 years old?
Is there any questions about the class? Alhamdulillah. So very quickly, also, Hamza, what was the dua that we learned? Huh? Just now. You don't have to tell, like, if you tell me in English. Oh, mashallah. And so if a person says this dua, mashallah, jazakallah khair. If a person says this dua, Abdul Samad, we're encouraged to say this dua at what time? Go to a new place, which in today's time can be what? Hotel, visiting family out of town, or whatever the case may be. All right, we say this dua, so nothing that will harm us. Tayyib. Also, Brother Rashid. He left. So, Brother Rashid. A person swears by Allah. Says, Wallahi, I'm going to do such and such, such and such. And it's a sin that they're saying. Do they have to? Can they fulfill it? No. If they swear by something that's halal, and they're trying to, they realize, man, I can't keep doing it. I swore by Allah that maybe after Ramadan they was feeling it. They was like, man, wallahi, I'm gonna fast every Monday and Thursday for the rest of my life. They made that an obligation upon them. Allah didn't make that an obligation upon them. They made that an obligation upon themselves. So a person after a week, 2-3 weeks, man, it's hot out here. I don't know. I can't hold this no more. What do they need to do to expiate that? Make Tawbah. After Tawbah, Mateen? Feed 10 people. Salim, they can't feed 10 people. Poor people. Don't just come to the masjid and just, yo, brothers, we going out to eat after class. No, it ain't gonna work like that. Salim, if they can't do that, then what do you need to do?
Gotta clothe them.
Clothe them. Khalid, what's next?
Fast.
Before fasting. Free an inmate. You free an inmate. You might go to jail, Sheikh. Free the brothers behind the wall, right? He ain't do nothing. It's fine. Put on his books. Play it, love. So free a slave, but today we don't have the slaves like they had back then. All right. And if obviously there's no slaves, then Mustafa, what do they do? I was talking big Mustafa, but little Mustafa, that works. Free Mustafa. I'll tell you. Yes, Mustafa, if they don't find they can't free a slave, then they have to, mashallah, fast 3 days. Muhammad, Sheikh Muhammad. If is a lot, these are good things that a person is going to do, even though they cannot no longer keep up the vow that they put upon themselves. So feeding 10 people, clothing them, or fasting those 3 days, is Allah still going to reward that person for the action they have done? Sheikh Muhammad. Yeah. Is Allah still going to reward them? No problem. So they made a vow and they could no longer keep the vow, and they feed 10 poor people. Is Allah going to reward them for feeding those 10 poor people? Absolutely. Alhamdulillah. And Sheikh Jamil, what is the definition of isti'adah, seeking refuge with Allah? It's basically asking Allah to help you before or after the calamity. Which one? Before the calamity. Inshallah. We'll end with that. SubhanAllah. Yes, you had a question.
What would you advise for
The excessive use of swearing, because like the verse is mentioned that Allah will not hold you account for that which you didn't mean from your oaths. However, at the same time, the Sahaba from the Umar Khattab and the other Sahaba, they forbade people from just saying wallahi, 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 wallahi. Right? Because by saying this so much, it belittles the reality of what you're saying. That's number one. All right? And then also, by a person constantly doing that, it can lead them to swearing about something that's even a sin. So a person should not make a habit of just saying wallahi, wallahi, wallahi. And it happens, we find our children, sometimes they say it, a lot, to challenge each other. Say wallahi that you did the dishes. Say wallahi this and that. Say wallahi you clean your room, right? So we don't always do that, but just refrain from keep saying wallahi, wallahi. It's not a good practice to always swear by Allah. Because also it belittles, like I said, the seriousness of it. For now, when someone really says, ahi wallahi, I'm telling the truth. But if you're always known to say that, and sometimes you lie when you say it, is anybody going to what? Nobody's going to believe you. Right? So you shouldn't make a habit of what? Always saying it. So you end with that. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.